And now we're on Daf Ayin Omid Beis. And in this pasuk, we have two havayas. Let's read the pasuk again. Ve'im hayo tiyeh. Hayo is one havaya, one marriage. Tiyeh is the second marriage. So what does it mean that she was married twice? And that's what the Gemara is darshaning here. Makish kod me havaya shnil, kod me havaya rishon. There were in fact two marriages here. And the first marriage terminated with the death of the Orus. And then she was given over for a second marriage to a second Orus. And the Torah combines these two Havayas in one to teach you that we're going to equate the two Havayas. That's called the Hekesh. So now we have Kod Me Havaya Rishona. What's Kod Me Havaya Rishona? These are the Nedarim that she had taken before the Erusin. So when the Erusin takes place, the Baal, the Orus, has rights to be made for Nedarim that she brings into the Erusin. So that's called Kodme Nedarim that were Kodmin Lahavaya Rishona to the first Erusin. Now her Orus dies, and she's given over for Erusin to a second Orus. And those Nedarim that she took after the death of her first Orus, before the marriage to the second Orus, those are called Kod Me Havaya Shnia. And Kod Me Havaya Shnia means the Nedarim that were Makdim, that came first before the second Erusin. So what do we get and what do we derive from this Hekesh between Kod Me Havaya Rishona and Kod Me Havaya Shnia? And the Gemara applies the following logic. Ma Kod Me Havaya Rishona av Mefer L'Chudei. Those Nedarim that she took before the first Erusin. And now her Orus, and now at this point, who's in the driver's seat? Well, the Torah says, Va'osra Isur V'beis Aviyah. So that's called Av Mefer L'Chudei, meaning before she had Erusin, the first Erusin, any Nedarim that she had were totally, exclusively in the absolute control of the Av, and he can now be Mefer Ha Nedarim, and that's called Kod Me Havaya Rishona. So in the situation before the Erusin, the Av is in the driver's seat totally from A to Z, 100%, and he's Mefer on his own, exclusive Hafara rights. It's Av Kod Me Havaya Shnia. So too, after the Orus dies, before the second Erusin, Av Mefer L'Chudei. He, as a single-handed effort, can achieve Hafara even on the Chelik HaOrus. So it means Nisrokno Rishus La'av, from the Misas HaOrus, before the second Erusin, the Av gains all of those rights over Hanedarim. Even though, again, the Orus on the first Havaya had rights to those Nedarim, but now he dies. And the father is now going to step into his shoes, the shoes of the Orus, and he's giving Mayfair without the Orus. So the Gemara raises the following question. Amor, perhaps that halacha of Nisrok Rishus La'av, Hanimi, that only applies to Nedarim Shalom Niru La'Orus. Maybe the Orus, before he died, never heard about these Nedarim. And his chus to be made for Nedarim emerges and is generated by his shmiya of the neder. The moment he hears the neder, he becomes the zakai with rights to be made for the Nedarim. But what happens if he actually heard about these Nedarim before he died? And therefore he was already zocher in his rights to control the neder, meaning to be made for the neder. And now he dies, possibly lo motzi mefer av. The Gemara is arguing that the father cannot be mefer. Why? Because there was a schus that the oros was zochen. So it's not similar to Kod Me'avaya Rishona. In Kod Me'avaya Rishona, obviously the oros has no rights over those Nedarim. He doesn't even exist anymore, as far as we're concerned. There was no heiress. But when you get to Kod Me'avaya Shnia, if the first oros heard about the Nedarim, he already was Zocha. Maybe in that case, he cannot be Nisrokna, he cannot pass on his rights to the father with his death. And the Gemara answers, even in Dam Shlo nearly Oros, if the Torah is talking about a case where the Oros didn't even hear about the Neder, and what never even got a chance to emerge is the Oros's rights to be made for the Neder, is Benurev Beis Avia Nafka. From the Pasuk, Benurev Beis Avia, we can derive the conclusion that the father can be made for as a sole lonely agent, alone, like any neder of his bas kuya, because the oros was not zocher. So therefore, we must assume that this hekesh is coming to teach us about nedarim that were already niruli oros, meaning before he died, he already heard about the nedarim. He was granted the rights to be made for the nedarim, and now with his death, those rights are transferred over to the father, and the father can be made for as a sole effort. The Mishnah teaches us that the Baal has one superior status over the Av, and that is that he's made for Bebaga. Va'av einu made for Bebaga. Hechi Domi. One says, what's this case that the Oros is made for Nidre Arusaso as a Bogeres? Ubogra. If the original marriage took place while she was a Nara, and then she became a Bogeres, in this case, the Oros could not be made for an Nedarim. And why is that so? Michti. Let's derive the following Kavachom. Misa Motzia. If the father dies, it takes her out of the rishus of the father. Ubagras Motzia, Mishasav. And likewise, she's only in the rishus of her father as long as she's a Nara. But once she becomes Bogeres, she leaves the rishus of her father. So we have these two cases, two scenarios in which the father loses his rights to be made for Nedarim. One is, and in both cases, she leaves the rishus of the father. One is the case of Misa, father died. Second case is she became a Bogeres. And therefore the Gemara is bothered by the following question. If in these two scenarios, the Bas leaves the rishus of her father, then by equating these two scenarios, and you're going to derive Bagros from Misa, let's go a step further. Let's say Ma Misa lo nisrokna rishus l'baal, afle Bagros lo nisrokna rishus l'baal. You're assuming, and that was the Yofa Koach HaBaal, that he could be made for Hanedarim even in Habagos, whereas the Av is out of the picture in Habagos. The Gemara is arguing, no, that's not so. I agree that with Bagros she leaves the rishus of the father, but we know that when the father dies, the principle is lo nisrok rishus l'baal. So your equation to Misas Ha'av is really not a fair equation, because Misas Ha'av, although it's Motzia Mishasav, it doesn't give the rights of the father over Hanedarim and transfer those rights over to the Baal. And therefore, the Baal cannot be made fair after the death of the father as a sole agent. And if that be the case, then why not equate the case of Nisbagra with the case of Misa Sa'av. And just like in Misa Sa'av, the rights of the father are not transferred over to the Baal, and he cannot be made for as a lone effort. So too in the case where the Nara became a Bogeres, she matured, then lo nisrok rishus l'Baal. So those rights of the father, as long as she was a Nara, are not transferred with her badras over to the Baal, and therefore he cannot be made for as a sole effort. And all this is because at the moment that he was Mekadesh, she was a Nara. That's called Kidshashi Nara. And she is in the Rishus of her father, even though he marries her because she's a Nara, and she hasn't left the Rishus of the father. Ella, the Gemara says, if it's not a case of Kidshashi Nara, because there we're going to apply the principle of Lo Nisrok Rishus L'Baal, Kidshashi Bogeres. She had already left the Rishus of the father when the Orus was Makadisha. Okay. Now, the Chachamim will give a certain period of time, we'll see what it is, for an Orus and an Arusa to prepare themselves for the Nisuin. And that means that, let's say, 12-month period of time is granted as a grace period to the Orus. He doesn't have to support his Arusa because it's only Eris and not Nisuin. But we can only allow him after the Eris in a 12-month period of time. If he doesn't marry her, he doesn't take her into the chuppah, he automatically becomes, at the termination of that 12 months period of time, Chayav ben Zonoseh. Now, if she became a Bogeres and left the Rishus of her father, then the Orus should be able to be made for 100 Nedarim. And why? And the Gemara holds now that the rights of a husband to be made for his wife's Nedarim are rooted in the fee of Mizonos. That when there is a fee of Mizonos, then ipso facto, that generates his rights to be made for the Nedarim. And there's a very important note here that the Gemara here in the Masechet, that the Gemara now is reflecting the unique shita of Rabbi Eliezer, which we haven't gotten to. It's on Daf Ayin Gimel. The logic of Rabbi Eliezer is that we have a principle called Kol Noderes Al Das Baila Noderes. That when a married woman takes a neder, she has in mind that this neder should only be chal if her husband approves of the neder. Now, when, under which situations, according to Rabbi Eliezer, does she have das that her neder should be accepted by her husband? That's only when he is supporting her, mefarnesa. Then she's noderes al daita. And that's going to apply even if he hasn't yet taken her into the chuppah, kodem anisuin, after the 12-month period of time, that grace period has expired. And now he's chayav to mefarnesa. If he's chayav to mefarnesa, then at that point, says Rabbi Eliezer, we activate the principle of noderes al das baila noderes. The Chachamim there on Daf Ayin Gimel and Beis disagree with Rabbi Eliezer. And they hold that the fee of Mizonos, once it's chal, is not sufficient in and of itself to activate the principle called noderes al das baila noderes. The principle called noderes al das baila noderes, according to Chachamim, only is activated with the actual Nisuin, but not with the fee of Mizonos. So the Gemara asks the following question now. Hotnina chada zimna. We already have this in the Mishnah later on in Daf Ayin Gimel. It says abogeres sheshas shneimasa chodesh. If 12 months passed from the Erisin and he hasn't yet taken her into the chuppah for the suin, Rabbi Eliezer holds that since he's chayiv b'mizonos after the 12-month period elapses, therefore he can be made for the Nedarim, and he's going to do so as a sole effort. So the question now is, why would our Mishnah, pointing out that the Baal has powers to be made for her Nedarim, even though she's a Bogeres, and he was Makadisha as a Bogeres, so it has nothing to do with Nisropna, and we're talking about where the 12-month period after Erison passed, that we have already in the Mishnah explicitly about Geresh Shasa Shnei Masar Chodesh, is Rabbi Eliezer Omer, whole Bible Chayv was on a Sareh who made for Levado as Nedarim. Now, before the Gemara actually answers this question, the Gemara asks a different question on our Mishnah. Chok Rufa Kash. Amrit, you said in our Mishnah, Habogeresh Shasa Shnei Masar Chodesh. There's a slightly different girsa here in the Ritva and others. Amrit Habogeres Sheshasa Yud Beis Chodesh Tarti. So he adds the word Tarti. Bogeres, and now we have our gear, so Lomali Shnei Masar Chodesh Bogeres B'Shloshim Yom. So he writes here in the name of the Ritva that Shtei Kushos Maksha Gemara. The Gemara is asking two different questions. Number one, the Yud Beis Chodesh Lomali Bogeres. Let's say she remains a Nara. Again, we have to figure out how can she remain a Nara, but let's theoretically take a case where she remains a Nara. After 12 months, he has to support her, and now, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he can be made for 100 Nedarim. So why do you emphasize Bogeres here? Lomali Bogeres. And secondly, if it's a case of Bogeres, then we don't wait a full 12 months. But the takana was that he should marry her within 30 days. And that's called in the language of the Shas, B'Shloshim Yom, Sagilo. So therefore, if from the Erison 30 days passed, in the case of Bogeres, then he has to marry her, and therefore he has to be Mefarnis her, and therefore he should be able to be made for 100 Nedarim. So why are you telling me Bogeres Shasa Shnei Masar Chodesh? Well, why do you need Shnei Masar Chodesh? And alternatively, if it's already Shnei Masar Chodesh, why do you need Bogeres? Even a Nari after you base Chodesh, it's Higia Lizmana. That's the first Mishnah in Suda. So the Gemara answers, Tani, there are two dinim that the Mishnah is teaching us, and you have to separate them. Bogeres, when 30 days pass after the Erison, then the Oros could, as a lone effort, be made for 100 Nedarim. And the Shasa Shnei Masar Chodesh, now we're going back to Nara, after 12 months, the Oros as a lone effort can be made for 100 Nedarim, because at that point he gives Manvelo Nisu, and he's chayiv to be Mefarni, so therefore he has rights to be made for 100 Nedarim. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to our kasha. After that digression, we come kasha, right? Why did our Mishnah have to teach this halacha twice? And the Gemara offers two answers. Iboy Sema, I can tell you that the Ikar Chiddush Hacha Dafka, our Mishnah is giving us the Iker Kiddush, and Din Bogeres, the Kani Hasam, Mishum de Boy Lifluge, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabban. So the real Din of Bogeres is right here. That's the fundamental Mishnah. The only reason the Mishnah repeats this Din on Daf Ayin Gimon base is in order to present the machlokus between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim. That only Rabbi Eliezer holds that the Oris could be meifir as a lone effort once he becomes chayiv in mizonos, but the Chachamim hold that even though it's lacher giyazman, and even though the Oris is chayiv in mizonos, nevertheless he cannot be meifir hanidarim alone until after Nisuin, until after she enters into the chul. The Boy Sema now the Gemara offers another answer. Bogeres Dafka. The Chiddush is really in the Mishnah later on. That's where the Mishnah is dedicated to the laws of Bogeres. Here, it's only mentioned Ivy meaning by the by. The Ivy did Nasiv Reisha Bozeh, Nasiv Seifanavi Bozeh. Once the Reisha wants to tell us that Yofa Kocha Av Mikocha Baal, because in the law of Nisrokna, the father inherits with the death of the Baal the Baal's rights to be Mefer Nedarim. Is Nasiv Seifanami Bozeh. He shows you that the Baal has a koach which is greater than that of the Av, because the Baal could be Mefer Nedarim even when she's a Bogeres, whereas the Av cannot. And this leads us to the Mishnah here on Daf Ayin Aleph. We'll do that in Mirz Hashem tomorrow. And I wish you a meaningful fast today on Asar B'Tevis, which was zocheh to see the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, the Meir of the Armenian.